And ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you to the Global Apparel Sourcing Expo that the IAF, the International Apparel Federation, is organizing with its partners, Sourcing Journal and ForSource. The International Apparel Federation is a global body that unites industry associations in the apparel industry all across the world, on all continents. So our members represent brands, small, medium-sized brands, Europe, US, Canada, Australia, and manufacturers from Asia, Africa, Latin America. And as IF, it is our mission to unite the entire fashion ecosystem to promote, stimulate stronger, smarter, and more sustainable supply chains. Right now, I'm very lucky to have sitting virtually opposite me, Edward Hertzman, the founder and president of Sourcing Journal, one of the premier trade magazines in our industry, and partner of the Expo, of which this conference is a component. So welcome to partly your own Expo, Edward.
Well, thank you for having me. I much appreciate it.
Great. And I would like to ask you a couple of questions. Obviously, we are now in the sustainability block of this conference, so they will center on sustainability. And I think you're a good person to ask those questions because your publications, part of them, at least, surely deal with this topic. And I think we share the belief that you can never separate the issue of sustainability from the wider topic of the business and the business models in our industry anyhow. So it's very much located to the operation of the supply chain as a whole. And I suppose looking at the questions that I have for you, some of your answers may reflect that as well. But let's just start right away. So before the pandemic, because we have to talk about that, there was a lot of talk about change in the industry. And even now, when there seems to be a bigger catalyst for change and part of the industry is simply stalled, there's still a big problem we can see making that leap from innovation to practice. What is your take on that? Why do you think that is?
Well, simply put, change is hard. Change is hard in our personal lives. Change is hard professionally, and change is especially difficult for very large, organizations. We've been hearing about speed to market strategies for 10 years plus now, and how many companies over and over again have the inability to adapt a more robust supply chain model. And it doesn't matter how many case studies are published, it doesn't matter how many consultants they bring in, they're still 6 months out in their planning, doing the same thing over and over again, marking down inventory excessively and losing money. I think, since this theme or this conversation is centered around sustainability, we can say why has it been so hard for companies to really incorporate sustainability into their business thus far? And I think, while others have been more progressive than others, I think that the short answer is because it's for too long been viewed as a cost. It's a line item, it's a cost. And I think what we're going to really dive into in this conversation is that until you stop looking at sustainability as a cost, but part of your supply chain, and maybe it's part of your recovery and part of your business model, your business model moving forward, it's always going to be a difficult, it's going to be difficult to incorporate. And that is why it's been hard for companies to change. And I'm hoping that, there is some conversation, debate over what sustainability will look like in a post-pandemic world. I'm of the opinion that it will be even more important, what the short and long term, what it's going to look like in the short and long term, maybe a little bit different, but long term, I think it's going to have an even greater importance, and therefore companies need to accelerate their thinking and how they're going to incorporate sustainability into their supply chain and into their overall, DNA and culture.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's really good. Well, you actually provided the bridge to the next question yourself when you were saying it's been viewed, sustainability is being viewed too much as a cost. So how in your mind should it be viewed, and how should companies achieve that? How should it be viewed as a value, maybe?
Well, sustainability for all too long is again, simply put, is do no harm. Let's reduce waste. Let's use recycled fibers. Let's have a more circular, supply chain. But I think now we have to say it's do no harm, and how do we create value? How do we create value? And how do we create economic value? So part of this is if consumers are going to demand sustainability, we have some data points to show that consumers are demanding it more than they have before. Therefore, companies have to provide this to their consumers to stay relevant. Now, the problem is consumers want to be sustainable. Brands want to be more sustainable. Factories want to be more sustainable, yet no one wants to pay for it. So we need a cost-neutral business model. Now, companies will argue, and factories will argue, I don't have the margin to support additional costs. Let's go back to the first thing we just said. It's an additional cost. Why don't you have that extra money? Well, let's take a step away from sustainability. Here's an industry that ties up most of its working capital in the supply chain. It ties up a lot of its money in orders 6 months out. It ties up a lot of its money in inventory that's sitting in a warehouse that's marked down excessively. It doesn't really have a very profitable business model. How do you have 60, 70, 80% initial markup and you go out the door at single digits or losing? So if we can find a way to unlock that working capital, increase profitability, companies will then have the additional financial bandwidth to incorporate sustainability into their business. And if you could provide customers what they want, you're going to sell more. If you sell more, you're going to make more money. If you make more money, you can pay more money to the factories. If the factories make more money, they can invest more money. And this is how it's all tied together. It can't just be an internal versus external, push and pull. It has to be viewed as one singular chain. And you have to rethink your economic model in order to make sustainability feasible.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree more, and that's maybe sometimes also a reason why it doesn't happen more is that you've got your people in companies thinking about the profit, and you've got your people in the company thinking about the sustainability. While what they should be doing is to come up with a more holistic company-wide approach, right?
As factories, the sustainability team will approach them with XYZ initiatives and requirements and desires. And then you'll have the buying team saying, I need XYZ pricing. If I don't do this, I have to move the orders elsewhere. And so you still have a very siloed communication strategy, or even a siloed strategy among organizations. And frankly, I think this needs to be a C-level, even a boardroom conversation. This is not just about, I'm going to buy X fiber. I'm saying, look, you have to have the right ingredients, and you have to use the water treatment facilities, and you have to have energy saving initiatives within your factories. All these are important. But again, this is not a box you check. Sustainability is about doing better business. And this has to be a C-suite, or like I said, a board level initiative, and it has to then trickle down. If you just think that you have a sustainability team and they're going to check a bunch of boxes so you can tell some artificial story to the marketplace or some cause marketing benefit, well, we could have a whole separate conversation on authenticity and brands being called out and this whole cancel culture right now. But you do not want to be on the wrong side of a PR scandal right now. And I think people are very much into transparency. And that doesn't just mean, the ingredient you're using, but the workers, how you're paying the workers, how you treat everybody. Companies really need to think about how they're going to approach everything moving forward.
Right. And do you see some, do you see some big differences in the market currently? I mean, you have a pretty good from vantage point to see a lot of different players and how they act and how they invest.
I think if we look at Europe has been more progressive. They've been more advanced in this. So when you talk to some of those companies, this is they're just ahead of the curve. Look, you go to Europe, they made you pay for the grocery bags long before they did it in America. I think you go to Amsterdam, they're riding bikes up and down the street. There's more electric cars. The cabs are all Teslas. I think sustainability, not just in the fashion industry, is just part of the culture and DNA there. Here, it's still very much looked at, and I know maybe this is being a little harsh. For some, it's a marketing strategy. For some, it's part of their DNA. But is it a wide scale, society-driven initiative? No. Maybe more in the food sector, but apparel, it hasn't really hit that yet. But I think that what we've seen, and we've done a lot of proprietary research at Sourcing Journal, is that the brands that are most likely, or the brands that are taking sustainability more seriously, are doing it because their consumers are demanding it.
Okay.
And so they find that's an economic reason. The brands that are lagging behind tend to see or feel that their consumers won't pay a premium, their consumers don't care about it. So again, they kind of just avoid it, which again is not the right answer. That's a short-sighted view. So again, I think we have that divide. I think if we look, as I said before, Europe versus America, not everyone is on the same. The thing about sustainability is it's not like a finite definition. It's not a finite thing. It's that I am sustainable. I think sustainability is a process. It's a journey. It's a marathon. So I may be more sustainable in the fibers I choose, or the factory may have really invested a lot in their water treatment facilities and their water savings. Or some factories may really have CO2 initiatives or energy savings. Is anyone going to have every single sustainability box checked off at 100%? No, and that's okay. You got to start somewhere, and I think that's the fear. A lot of companies are like, "This is such a daunting task. How do I start?"
Yeah.
So you have to think about, if you're going to let that pressure and that fear hold you back, well, then you're never going to start. You got to start somewhere. And then we have to think that sustainability is going to be evolving as technology advances, science advances. Companies are going to constantly have to evolve and invest and pivot. And that's what our obligation to our consumers are, to our industry is, and to our earth is, and to our fellow, humans is.
Yeah, that's good. I agree. In Europe, there's and this is very conceptual, but I think it's a strong concept, which is the due diligence. So there's talk about making due diligence in supply chains, so not financial due diligence, in making that mandatory by law. And actually, the concept comes from the UN, made by a Harvard professor, John Ruggie. And it's pretty powerful because basically it says you have to make a reasonable effort to make sure that you're not a bad actor towards your supply chains in terms of environment and people. And what is reasonable depends on the size of the company, and it sometimes depends on the product, and it can be reasoned both ways. I guess it's if you're very small, you can do less, so you have to make a good choice. So you start with the most dangerous stuff, where people can die in your supply chain, and if you do too little, it's also unreasonable. So it gives companies sort of a framework to base their decisions on, because I agree with you, it's a daunting task. And if people around you are expecting you to do everything at once and get it all right, you might as well quit. So you have to.
It makes you think, if you bring up a good point, does the government have to start mandating? Was it France? I could be wrong, but no longer allowing people to incinerate clothes or things like that. So it seems so ridiculous. But you have companies, both from the luxury space down to the fast fashion, that have very aggressive And my point here is not to call anybody out, and I'm not naming any names, but there's a lot of hypocrisy that goes on out there. Is companies will have aggressive sustainability targets, yet they'll incinerate clothing because they don't want it to go into the marketplace and dilute their businesses. So maybe we need to look at that on the state side.
Great, Eddie. Edward, thank you very much. I would like to move to a close of the conversation. I suppose we could go on for quite a while. It's a topic close to my heart as well, and I can hear close to yours. But you were also hinting a little bit in the beginning that you wanted to look to the future as well. So in this post-COVID-19 world, whenever it will start, what will, in your view, what will sustainability look like?
That is a difficult question to answer. It's a great question, and I wish I had a crystal ball. I tend to be more bearish and think, even earlier this year, I tend to say that this is a 2020, 2021 problem, and I don't have any reason to believe that this is going to continue on for another year minimum. We will learn and how to interact, as you and I are talking right now. That doesn't mean business ceases. I think there's a couple things. A pandemic does not give people a pass. It doesn't give people a pass to do the right thing, whether that is environmental, whether that is sustainable, whether that is social. I think that we still have to practice good business and do the right thing. Now, when it comes to economic incentive, can I give you today an economic incentive why you should heavily invest in sustainability in 2020 or even 2021? I think I'd be lying if I said if you put all your dollars in that stock right now that you're going to see a return tomorrow. However, I think if you do not do that, you may miss the boat. And why? Unfortunately, I think we're going to see consolidation at the factory level. I don't think that if this continues, we're going to a lot of factories will be able to sustain. And the grade A, tier A factories that have invested a tremendous amount of money in doing the right thing and in upgrading their facilities will be the ones all the brands want to work with, the better brands, the more sustainable brands. And because of that, there's going to be less capacity to work with those factories. So if you're not already engaging, thinking about that, I think you may miss out. I think also consumers are going to be much more, I don't know if cautious is the right word, but critical on where they vote with their dollars. So people may buy less, but they may buy with a purpose. And we could see how quickly today one wrong move, the bohos of the world, of the it's gone in a second. So you really need to think about the authenticity of what you're preaching and what you're saying, and making sure that you're really following through on everything. Now, if customers are going to demand sustainability, you better make sure that your supply chain is equipped, and I think that you have to also make sure that how you treat people. That's another thing. It's ironic. We see orders being canceling, and we're seeing poverty, and we're seeing workers not getting paid. Well, that is a problem. Don't just talk about how you're doing in reducing energy, and then you're letting all these workers, go hungry. So again, we have to think about the entire business model that we're involved in. So I think that companies, also talent, it's kind of ironic what I'm about to say. I think that, there's a gluttony of talent right now, but I think the good talent, the right talent will be picked up by companies. I think some people will have to find other industries to go into, because I don't think there'll be enough jobs for everyone that's been displaced to find homes in the fashion industry. So companies, again, if they're going to make big sustainable pledges and initiatives and whatnot, you better have the right talent on board now. And you better start thinking about, like I said, don't wait to 2022. You can't say, well, if things get better, then I'll kind of tackle this. And as I mentioned before, that is, if that is the way you think, then you're looking at this as simply an external, well, I could raise the price on a certain collection, call it the eco collection, and I'll make money or not. No, this is part of your economic recovery. This is part of your supply chain. This is how you're going to remain relevant, become relevant, and become more profitable moving forward. If you do not think like that, if it's an external and internal pull, push and pull, well, I think you have flawed thinking and you probably won't make it through this anyway.
Exactly. I think so. The last thing you're saying is interesting. This is actually one of those moments where if you haven't been making the investments before, you haven't been doing anything in that, it might already be too late. That could be the issue. So we'll see where the where some form of a shakeout that we'll see in the industry where that leads us to. But yeah, I think with that. I'm going to thank you a lot for the